What's up, guys? Today I'm joined by a very special guest this morning, Jordan Elliott, who covers the 49ers for SB Nation, I'm pretty sure. But we have Jordan Elliott on today. If you have Twitter, you know him. He's a Twitter legend. He's probably one of the smartest people I've seen. I'm probably one of the smartest people on Twitter, Niner fans on Twitter. So if you haven't checked him out on Twitter already, go check him out on Twitter. The link is in the description. But how you doing today, Jordan?
I'm good, man. I got a day off from work today, so I'm just hanging out. Happy to be here talking football with you.
Well, that's great. So let's dive right into it. Starting off with what will define success for Trey Lance this upcoming season?
I just think any kind of material growth that we can quantify in a way where we saw one thing week 1, and by week 12, week 14, we're seeing progress in a tangible way that we can point to on film, or we can point to statistically, ideally both, where there's really some sense of, even though he's far from a finished product as any quarterback at the age of 22 would be, he is making these leaps and strides forward, and we're seeing week by week he's getting better with more game reps. I don't think the 49ers have to be a top team in the NFC. I don't think he needs to be in MVP discussions and some of these lofty expectations I've seen thrown out there. I just think we need to see some kind of progress forward towards the high ceiling that many of us believe he has. It's not going to happen overnight, but it would be nice to see some steps towards that in a relatively timely manner, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think Trey Lance has to, show some sort of signs and try to improve week by week. Now, obviously, he's gonna have his struggles. We all know that. He's 22. He played FCS college football, so he hasn't played against Alabama and none of those teams. So obviously, he's gonna struggle a little bit. But obviously, like you said, I definitely some expectations that I have, and I think what will determine some of his success is that we need to see some of those flashes, some of those improvement week by week. Like you said, from week 2 to week 14 or whatever, we got to see some sort of improvements. And from a game standpoint, from a fan, and also from a fan standpoint, I think there's a couple of things that Trey Lance has to do now. Obviously, I think the Niners probably have to make the playoffs unless there are injuries. Now, I don't think that's all on Trey Lance, but the quarterback is an important position. And if the 49ers don't make the playoffs, a lot of the Jimmy fans would be like, Jimmy makes the playoffs. When Jimmy's healthy, the Niners are in the playoffs. So how come Trey Lance can't make the playoffs? Now, the Niners really do have a hard schedule, but if the Niners don't make the playoffs, I think that's one thing that a lot of Jimmy fans and fans in general will look at, and they'll probably call Trey Lance a bust. Obviously, I don't think that, but and another thing that I think will determine success for Trey Lance. Now, the Rams gotten way better. They re-signed Aaron Donald. They got Bobby Wagner. They added Allen Robinson. Now, I really don't expect Trey Lance to beat the Rams twice. I think that's really, really hard to do. But I think Trey Lance has to beat the Rams at least once this season in order for, the Niners fans to at least the Jimmy Garoppolo fans to at least keep quiet, because if Trey doesn't do some of the things that Jimmy Garoppolo is able to do, because Jimmy Garoppolo is able to win, and that's what a lot of Niners fans are like. Jimmy Garoppolo wins, and even the national media, as much as Niners fans know we win in spite of Jimmy Garoppolo still wins football games, and he wins against the Rams twice a year, and he wins football games. We made it to the NFC Championship game, so there's a lot of high expectations. Now, I don't expect, Trey Lance to make it, or he has to make it to the NFC Championship game, but we have to see those strides. We have to see those improvements. And like I said, I think he has to at least beat the Rams once, and I think Trey Lance has to improve week by week by week.
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure.
Yep. Well, moving on to the next topic, Baker Mayfield got traded to the Carolina Panthers yesterday, and from what I've heard is he went for a conditional 5th-round pick, and the Browns ate up half of his contract. So I think Carolina only has to pay him, I think, $5 million next year or something around that number. But first off, what are your thoughts on Baker going to Carolina, and how does this affect Jimmy Garoppolo and the 49ers situation right now?
My initial thought was, I'm not gonna lie, I thought it was kind of interesting, funny, humorous. I don't know, whatever word you want to choose. That they had Darnold and Mayfield, both top 3 picks from the same draft class, both on 5th-year options, and both, just in my opinion, quarterbacks that I really don't think are long-term answers as starters in the NFL. They might win a job by default, but I wouldn't elevate them into that tier where I'd feel comfortable building around either of them going forward. I mean, I guess from Carolina's standpoint, like if they're just playing a numbers game, or if they get enough quarterbacks in the quarterback room, that one of them's bound to be decent at some point. But I just don't understand. They've parted with so much draft capital, and a lot of times I think just because it's not first round picks, people don't pay as much attention to it. It's much more headline grabbing to trade, multiple firsts or seconds. But when you're trading away and you're gutting your draft capital in the middle rounds, it makes it really hard to build a contender. That's one thing for me. I'm a big draft guy. I'm a big build through the draft guy. And getting players in the second, third, fourth round is how you become a championship contender. And the Panthers have kind of stripped away their ability to really play the numbers game in that area of the draft over the last couple of years and going forward. I don't really have a strong opinion between him or Sam Darnold. Matt Corral's there too. I'm not really super high on Matt Corral either. So it's like one of them's going to win the job by default pretty much. I just don't really see where the direction is coming from, like what their goal is. I mean, at the cost of a 5th round pick, Baker Mayfield's a former number 1 overall pick. He had shown some flashes, but I'm just not really seeing that. Like at a certain point, they're going to have to reset and they're going to have to get a younger quarterback. Like maybe that's Matt Corral. I'm not banking on a 3rd round quarterback to be the guy that I'm, building the future of my franchise around, but it just feels like they've swung and missed so many times that you can't just keep bringing in these reclamation projects like they did with Darnold. They're doing with Baker now. I just don't see the strategy there. And then in terms of the 49ers, Jimmy didn't really seem like it didn't make a ton of sense for Carolina to give up extra capital for Jimmy. And as much as I think Jimmy played better than Baker last year, and Baker had the torn labrum, so there's the injury stuff. And I think you could argue that Jimmy's been a better NFL quarterback than Baker Mayfield. I do think it makes a little bit more sense to trade for a guy like Baker if you're going to give up the capital, just because you can kind of talk yourself into, Jimmy's 30 years old. Baker is still on his rookie deal. Like maybe there's more from Baker. We've probably seen what we're going to see from Jimmy. So maybe you can kind of talk yourself into, if we get him in our building with our coaches and our scheme, we're going to get more out of him. I just think that's really dangerous based on the fact that they basically did the same thing with Sam Darnold last year, and it was a disaster. And I think Sam Darnold had plenty of, admirable physical traits. He made a lot. I'm a big Pac-12 guy. I'm a Cal fan. I watched a ton of USC. He made a ton of great throws in college. He looked like a guy that could be a good NFL quarterback based on his physical traits, but we just haven't seen it come together yet. So I really don't think it changes things for the 49ers. I think ultimately what they're going to have to do is they're going to either have to decide to keep Jimmy on a restructured deal. There's no way you can keep him on the cap hit he's on now, or you cut him and you let him kind of, just kind of like set him free and let him choose his next destination. You have the ability to spin that to the media and the public relations kind of is like, hey, we are grateful for the time he gave us. We're going to give him an opportunity to find his, next calling in the NFL and find his next, chart his next path throughout his career. So I don't think it's really huge for the 49ers. I just don't understand what they're doing in Carolina. If I was a Panthers fan, I wouldn't feel great because they have some really good players on that roster. Brian Burns, DJ Moore, Jeremy Chin, like they have some really good players. They just don't really have any sense of direction. And I don't think adding Baker Mayfield really changes any of that.
Yep, I didn't understand this move at first because you already have Sam Darnold. You drafted Matt Corral. Now, I don't really expect, much from the Carolina Panthers this year. Now, Brady came back to that division. The Saints also, Jameis Winston. Who knows how the Saints will be, but Carolina's not really doing anything this year. They're not going to make it to the playoffs. They'll be lucky to win, 9 games this season? So I really don't understand this move. And the funny thing that I was thinking about yesterday was both Baker and Darnold were drafted in 2018, and Baker was the first pick, and then Darnold, I think, was the second or third pick to the Jets. So you have both quarterbacks from the 2018 draft, the top 2 quarterbacks, and both these guys on your same team, but both of these guys aren't really your true starters, aren't going to be your future starters unless one of them, really, really does play well and your team makes it to the playoffs next year. But I really didn't understand this move from Carolina. I said this about Jimmy Garoppolo last week on my show with Grant was I don't see Carolina giving up trading for Jimmy Garoppolo because I don't think they'll take that risk because they already took that risk with Sam Darnold and it didn't pay off. So I really didn't see it. But the fact that they traded for Baker, I mean, if they were going to trade for one of those 2 QBs, I would say Baker was obviously the more likely choice because he has a lesser contract and the Browns paid for half of it. So compared to paying $5 million for Baker, who's younger and who isn't injured who isn't coming off a shoulder injury or shoulder surgery compared to Jimmy Garoppolo, who's getting paid $20 million. So obviously it makes more sense for Carolina, but I really don't understand what Carolina's doing and how that affects the Niners. I mean, Jimmy Garoppolo, either he gets cut or he's going to get restructured and stay on the team. Now, I want him to get cut because I really don't want, if Trey Lance has a bad game or Trey Lance throws an interception or whatever happens, then a lot of Niner fans are going to be like, put Jimmy in, or we're going to have the Jimmy Garoppolo, Trey Lance controversy, and even the teammates in the locker room, right? The team. There might be a little bit of controversy because Jimmy Garoppolo sitting on the bench and the Niners aren't winning football games and Trey Lance is struggling a little bit. There'll be a divide in the locker room. So I'd rather have Jimmy Garoppolo off this team, but I don't know, honestly, if he doesn't get cut or released, because John Lynch already came out and said Jimmy's too good of a quarterback to get cut or Jimmy's too good of a quarterback to get released. But, I mean, Jimmy Garoppolo either's got to get restructured and stay on this team, or the Niners should just straight up cut him, which what I would do.
Yeah, and at a certain point, too, like the 49ers have held on to him this long, and, things change during training camp. A team that looks set at quarterback now, unfortunately, injuries are a big part of playing the sport of football. Somebody could go down, and then their need, there's a need that's not there today in the present, but might be in a month. Or even they just get a guy that comes into camp that they're believing in that just doesn't look good. And, there's very few teams in the NFL where there's just concrete job security. A lot of these teams are in, a position where they need to win now. They need to have somebody who can step in. And whatever your opinions are on Jimmy Garoppolo and wherever you stand on where he is as a player, he does have a track record of being able to pilot a team with good playmakers and a good offensive scheme around him, and has shown the ability that, while it may be inconsistent at times, he can be a guy that can get you to double-digit wins and get you into the playoffs as a starting quarterback. And, you can't say that about a lot of quarterbacks that are going to have starting jobs in the NFL. They don't have the equity that Jimmy G has. So while I don't think that he's necessarily forcing anybody out of a starting job today, that might change a month from now. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with the 49ers not being in a rush to, just dump him now. I do think if they keep him on the roster, it's going to be a very interesting dynamic just based on the fact, like, these are human beings at the end of the day. They're gladiators on the gridiron. They're these, larger than life figures, but they are human beings and they have emotions and they have, human connections just like any of us. And a lot of these guys have gone to battle on that field with Jimmy for years. And as much as they probably believe in Trey and they see the talent, you make it very difficult to, move on. It's not like a one-to-one comparison, but it's almost like having an ex live with you as you're moving in with your new girlfriend or your new, partner. Like, that's something that, it just doesn't feel like the greatest outcome. But if you're able to put aside the emotion, I will also say that, having Jimmy G as an insurance policy, should anything happen to Trey Lance, also is an option that the 49ers might find very appealing. I just wonder how much that insurance policy is worth the emotional toll it's probably going to take. Just like you mentioned, anytime there's an incomplete pass or an interception or a game where Trey Lance maybe struggles a little bit, the noise is something that you could tell was kind of wearing on this team over the course of last season, and it would be amplified tenfold this year if he was still there. So I still have to believe there's a way that they find, a way to either release him and spin it in a very positive light or get something in return for a trade for him. Yeah, there's a chance they can keep him. I just don't see how you can rationalize it at this point. Like, it feels like the negative outweighs the positive at that point. And honestly, if I'm Jimmy G, I'd want a fresh start too. I'm like, hey, you made your decision, you moved up, you got this guy. I don't want to sit here and hold a clipboard on the team behind the guy that you drafted to replace me. Like, I think that's a totally reasonable take. I'm not saying that's how he feels, but if that were how he felt, I would totally understand it.
I mean, it's not justifiable for the Niners to keep Jimmy Garoppolo at the same contract that he's on right now for $27 million for 1 year. For him, if he does end up being the backup, it's not justifiable. You just can't justify it, right? So if the Niners do end up keeping him, like, how do you explain that to the fans and media? We kept Jimmy Garoppolo on our bench as the backup, and Trey Lance is going to be a starter, but Jimmy Garoppolo is getting paid $20 million this year as to be our backup. Like, what? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And, I mean, you said something about Jimmy Garoppolo is a winner, and he has a track record of being a winner. Now, I definitely agree, right? Jimmy Garoppolo is, 31-14? He is a proven winner. But I think a lot of that goes to the situation that he's in with the 49ers. And I think a lot of that goes to Kyle Shanahan, who puts him in a good situation, who builds a game plan that works in favor for Jimmy Garoppolo in the middle, short passes, slants, and he has screen passes. He has a guy and he has weapons, right? So I think, and one thing about the Niners is that the Niners love to run the football. So Jimmy Garoppolo doesn't throw it more than 20 times. And we saw it this season where if Jimmy Garoppolo to throw the ball more than 25, 30 times a game, or at least 30 times a game, more than 30 times a game, the Niners would end up losing a lot of the majority of those matchups. And on the flip side of when the Niners would run the ball 25 times and Jimmy Garoppolo would only have to throw it 20 or 25 times.
Yeah, and I think also too, like at the end of the day, as much as Jimmy has a track record, like Kyle Shanahan, the front office, there's no way that they made that move up to move the capital they did to get Trey Lance unless they were in agreement and they had some sort of concrete plan as an organization. And while it may be, there's going to be a transition period most likely, and it may not be the smoothest transition where they immediately hit the ground running and they're, winning 12, 13 games right off the bat. Like that's a move you make with long-term outlook. That's a move you make looking 5 to 7 years to the future, not just what makes me better next season. I have to believe if that's really how it was, that was their state of mind, they would have pursued a veteran option rather than moving the capital to draft a rookie, which no matter how much you believe in your scouts, no matter how much you believe in your own process, it's really, really hard to project guys from college to the NFL. It's a tremendously difficult science that has never been exacted, and it probably never will be. And I just think that that's something where they were willing to take the risk, thinking that this is something that sets us up potentially for the next decade. And that may come at the cost of having a year or two where you're kind of having the growing pains and adjusting, and this guy's getting his lumps in with those game reps. And, fans aren't going to want to hear it in the present. People want things right away. I understand it, but that's something where we might look back on a few years from now. And if Trey Lance hits the ceiling I think he's capable of, I don't think anybody's going to really be all up in arms that they had a growing period, because he could end up being a player that's dynamic for them again for the next decade. So I do think that's one thing where we really have, I try to look at things as removing emotion as much as possible and removing my own opinions and biases. And one big difference between fans and front offices is fans are always thinking about what's going to make me better today. What's going to make me better to win games. I want to sit down on my couch and watch the 49ers win today. Whereas a front office is looking long-term generally. They're looking, hey, I need to be competitive not just today, but tomorrow and the day after that and going forward. And I think that move to Trey Lance really signifies that. And I don't think they would have made that had they not been convicted in their belief that he was the guy to do it. And I just don't see a scenario where, I've seen people floating like, well, just let Jimmy stay and, let them compete. You can't have a situation where Jimmy wins out and wins the starting job. The optics of it would be absolutely terrible. And then you're the only way I could see that working out is if they do that, they announce Trey Lance as the starter some point during training camp or the preseason, and then Jimmy's again available via trade. And it's just like spun as, we were so blown away by Trey Lance. We love what Jimmy can do, but man, this guy's arm is so special. His physical abilities are so special. So again, the more and more I wrap around just the decisions they've made, the way that it looks like they're setting up for the future, I don't see how you could just bring Jimmy back and let him be in a position where he wins the starting job again.
Yeah, but I just want to answer Barrier Baller 18's question real quick. I'm expecting Trey to be better than Jimmy immediately, or at least elevate the offense to be better than what it's been. Am I being unreasonable?
I mean, I wouldn't say unreasonable, but I would also expect there to be, like the Texans game, for example. I thought Trey Lance had some incredible throws in that game. One of his best throws didn't even go down as a completion because Texans defensive back got away with holding Brandon Ayuk's arm, but it was some of the best ball placement I've seen from a 49ers quarterback throwing downfield outside the numbers, and I could probably since Colin Kaepernick, honestly. I do think that there is going to be a bit of, I don't say inconsistency because it's not like the offense was super consistent before, but I do think a lot of that short game, yak, stuff over the middle, between the hashes, that quick game, there might be a little bit of an adjustment there. So I'm not necessarily expecting Trey Lance to come in and just immediately elevate the offense in all facets. I think it's fair to him that he needs time to grow and he needs time to acclimate with game reps, no matter how much you're working in practice, no matter how much film work you're putting in. And Trey Lance is an extremely intelligent quarterback. Like that's one thing that doesn't get talked about enough. We talk a lot about his physical abilities. You hear about his arm and his legs and his mobility. his brain is arguably his most valuable trait, which is incredible to think about when you think about how gifted he is physically. But I also think it's fair to temper expectations a little bit. So I wouldn't say that Eric's being unreasonable. I just think that I would be hesitant to say, like, right out the gate, they're going to be better for all 60 minutes of every game going forward. But I do think you will see more explosive plays. You'll see the field stretch vertically a little bit more, which probably will open up things underneath a little bit more. So I definitely think the ceiling of the offense is higher, Eric. I just don't necessarily have a strong opinion that it's going to happen right away because, again, I'm trying to give Trey Lance the benefit of the doubt and give him a period of time to really acclimate. I think it's a lot to ask of any player to step in and immediately be better than the incumbent starter in an offense that's as complicated as Kyle Shanahan's.
Yep. I mean, I don't expect it. I don't expect Trey Lance to elevate the offense right away either. Because, I mean, number one, if you look at the Arizona game last year, Kyle Shanahan really didn't look like he was fully trusting Trey Lance with the offense 100%. The offense was kind of weird in that game. And then the Texans game, obviously, Trey Lance had a slow start. And you said it, I mean, Trey Lance had some phenomenal throws in that game, right? And not that throw to debo. That throw to debo, obviously, a deep pass. We don't see that from Jimmy Garoppolo. But there was throws where he would be on the run and he would be throwing it off his back foot and he'll hit Ayuk before right on the out of bounds, right? And he would throw it to Ayuk and Ayuk would toe tap it and catch the ball, right? And he would run and he would make a lot of phenomenal throws. He just would. He would make a lot of throws on the run, escaping pressure. He would make a lot of good throws. Now, obviously, he started off slow in that first half, but now do I expect the offense to be elevated right away? No, but do I definitely expect to see more explosive plays from Trey Lance next year and the offense to have more explosive plays, maybe a couple of deep shots in every game? I think so because Trey Lance has the arm to have, and he's able to hit those deep targets and hit those deep routes. And obviously, he's not going to hit 100% of the time, but he has the arm to do that. So I definitely expect to see some deep plays down the field, big plays from Kyle Shanahan in the offense.
Yeah, I think that's well said.
Paul H says, "Bro, y'all see Cowherd on that arm fitness BS again." Yep, I saw that.
Yeah, I don't really know what to make of it. It's not, Colin Cowherd, Mike Silver, those guys are very plugged in and they have been around the NFL world for a long time. So I don't think they're just making up stuff. I don't particularly understand the wording of it. It sounds almost like, for anybody who's a baseball fan, like I used to pitch, I was a pitcher when I played baseball. Like I understand when you're throwing a lot in that sport, you tend to have some arm fatigue. You have some days where your arm's just not responding. So it's not something I've really ever seen in the NFL world that I can recall off the top of my head, but I also don't think it's something that's totally made up. Maybe there was something stemming from the finger injury last year and it's intertwined with that. I'm not really sure, but I'm also not going to sit here and just, take shots at Mike Silver or Colin Cowherd because, again, I think those guys are very plugged in and have been in this business for a long time. So it's just kind of one of those things where hey, they have their platform. They're saying what they're saying. I don't really have a strong opinion one way or the other. I'm sure if you ask Trey Lance, he would say arm fatigue. I don't know what you're talking about, so it's just one of those things where we're just going to have to let it play out and see how it goes. I try not to get too wrapped up in off-season stuff like this that really has I'm a big let's see it with our own eyes kind of person. And unfortunately right now, there's nothing on this day from today that we can see with Trey Lance throwing the ball. But if you go back to game film last year, I didn't really see anything that made it look like his arm was worn out or tired or was, not able to make the throws that he's shown he's able to make on film. So I don't know what to make of it. I also I'm not going to sit here and say that they're like lying or making it up for clicks or anything. I don't think that would be fair either.
Shout out to some people in the chat. We got Carcast. He's also a young podcaster. Go check out his channel if you haven't already. Always Faithful 24/7. I went on his show a couple of weeks ago. They got a good YouTube channel also where they talk Niners football. Also, go check them out. I had a great time on their show. Barry a Baller, obviously. We all know Barry a Baller. Go check out his channel if you haven't already at Barry a Baller 18. And then the last one is Mariah. If you haven't already, go check out Mariah's YouTube channel. It's right here, Mariah 49 Faithful League. Go check out their channel with Tehran. But go check them out if you haven't already. So let's jump right into the next topic. PFF said the 49ers have the sixth best roster in the NFL, in the NFC. And a lot of fans got upset about this because they had, I think, the Rams ahead of them, obviously Tampa Bay. They had Green Bay, Saints, and then they had the Eagles. All five of those teams ahead of the 49ers. So do you agree with this ranking or do you disagree?
No, I completely disagree. I think that there's two fundamental problems here. First of all, I think that PFF is great at data collection. I think their ability to chart things like pressures, coverage matchups, individual statistics and stuff like that, I utilize that tool all the time, and I think it's fantastic. I think their database is very useful, and I'm very grateful that it exists. But I also have noticed a lot of their editorial work and their opinion-based articles and work and stuff like this is more so based on their own algorithms, their own charts, their own data, and things that are very easily disputed when turning on game film. And that's where, for me, it's kind of like, hey, I'm not one to trash other people, whether you're a content creator or whether you're, a big entity like PFF. We all have a lane. I try to stay in mine. I just personally don't really get behind any algorithm that would tell you that the 49ers have the sixth best roster, or any number of things that I've seen them post that I'm not necessarily in agreement with. I think one of the biggest problems with these is, as important as the quarterback position is, there's 53 spots on a roster. There's 46 people dressing on game day. There's 21 other positions on the field on offense and defense at a given time. You have special teams to account for. Like, too much of football these days is really, it feels like these rankings boil down to the quarterback position. And while I understand people not really being confident in ranking the 49ers high because they don't know what to expect from Trey Lance, like, hey, I get it. I understand it, especially if you haven't been as plugged into the 49ers fan base. If you're national media covering all 32 teams, it's a much more difficult to invest the time that maybe somebody who just covers the 49ers does. But I do think that overlooking, so like I talked about this yesterday, like I think the 49ers could make an argument for 8, even 9 positions on their roster where they have a top 5 player in the NFL. You have George Kittle at tight end. You have Trent Williams at left tackle. You have Fred Warner at linebacker. You have Debo Samuel at wide receiver. You have Nick Bosa at edge. You have Eric Armstead, who was one of the 5 best interior defensive linemen in the league last year. He was just incredible when he kicked inside. You have Jimmy Ward, who I think is a top 5 safety in the NFL. What he's asked to do and his ability to go line up in the slot, match up with guys, play man coverage, play the deep half, everything, his ability in the box, doesn't miss tackles. He's another guy that doesn't get the credit he deserves, especially from those national outlets. And then you have guys like Robbie Gould, even, who is in, never missed a kick in the postseason. He's in Green Bay, sending the number 1 seed home, kicking in, 5-degree weather. Like, little things like that really do matter. Kyle Juszczyk, okay, most of the league doesn't use fullbacks anymore. I get it, but what Kyle Juszczyk brings to a team, he is such a unique offensive weapon. And then you start thinking about the depth. Last season, Azeez Al-Shaair was one of the best linebackers in the entire NFL. And he was a guy that was an undrafted free agent that was kind of buried on the 49ers depth chart because of how good the roster was. Look at the defensive line, guys like Arden Key, Jordan Willis, Amenahue. These are guys that could get starting level snaps on another team, but the 49ers are so deep there that they're 10, 11. So I just think ultimately, like, their roster is so strong that, like, you could, like, they still look like a top 5 roster in the NFL. And I understand that, like, it's hard because we don't know what's going to happen at the quarterback position. But let's just say hypothetically, you take away let's say the quarterback's the number 1 spot on every roster. If you look 2 through 53, there are very few teams that I think stack up or are better than the 49ers or can match up with what they have. So yeah, like, I just think that it's a situation where they have the track record. They were just devastated by injury in 2020. But if you look at 2019 and 2021, when they were relatively healthy, on par with what, no NFL team's ever actually fully healthy, but compared to 2020, they were at least in the NFC Championship game both of those years. And that's not a fluke. That's not on accident. It's because the roster is so strong top to bottom. They can rush the passer. They can run the football. Those things translate. So again, I personally don't agree with it, but I also just think it's a situation where the results will speak for themselves. And if the 49ers have another season like they've had the last couple of years, it just makes those takes even more unreasonable than they are now.
Yep. I mean, if you look at team by team, I think obviously a lot of us can agree that Tampa has a better roster than the 49ers. And then if you look at the Rams, I think a lot of us can agree the starters, obviously, because the starters, the Rams have a lot of great starters. Matthew Stafford, Cooper Kupp, Robinson, Ramsey, Aaron Donald. So obviously the Rams have a lot. Now, the Rams, one thing that I see with the Rams that if some of their starters go down, they got issues because they don't really have that much depth at a lot of positions. Where with the Niners do have a lot of depth at every position. Where you look at the D line, right? You have Ebucom, you lost Arden Key, but then you brought back I can't remember Kerry Hyder. You brought back Kerry Hyder. So Nick Bosa, Eric Armstead, Kinlaw. You have a lot of depth at every position. Hassan Ridgeway. You have a lot of depth at every position. So the Niners have a lot of depth. Now, obviously, a lot of the question mark is the quarterback, right? Will Trey Lance pan out? Will Trey Lance succeed this year? But at the end of the day, like you said, I've seen the Niners have top five players at every position. The Niners have George Kittle, who arguably, when healthy, is the best tight end in football. You have Nick Bosa, who's arguably a top five pass rusher, not even defensive end, pass rusher in football. You have the best linebacker core, I think, in the whole NFL with Aziz Greenlaw, who when is healthy is a solid option, and then Fred Warner, who's a top five linebacker. You have the best linebacker core in football. And you mentioned it, Jimmy Ward, who doesn't get that much recognition from national media, but he's still a phenomenal safety, and I think he is a top five safety or a top 10 safety at least in the NFL, but he just doesn't get recognition from the national media. But the Niners have a lot of talent and a lot of depth compared to other teams. So I think, like I said, I think the Rams and obviously the Buccaneers are a better roster, but I think all the other teams, like in the list, where with the Saints, the Packers, and even the Eagles, I think you could debate and have a little bit. The Niners have a strong case to be ahead of those teams.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Troy Niner Knoll says, "Get rid of Jimmy no matter what." The best duo of all time, Amin the Dream and Jordan Elliott. Shout out to Amin, appreciate it. Our depth at every position is our true strength for a great student. We do have a lot of depth at every position. We have what you mean no matter what. If Lance got injured for the season, you still want to take Jimmy G out?
I think that's a tough thing because I think, like, yeah, in an ideal world, you have a backup that can come in and can just elevate your team to the same heights that your starting quarterback did. And I think, unfortunately, what really happened, I think that changed a lot of people's perception on this was when Nick Foles won the Super Bowl with the Eagles a couple years ago after Carson Wentz got hurt. That was a just one-off kind of situation. Like, that's not the norm. Like, generally speaking, if your starting quarterback goes out, your season's pretty much a wrap at that point. And I don't think that it means you shouldn't prepare for it, but I also think that you can't allocate resources to the backup quarterback position long term. Like maybe they could do it for this season with Jimmy if he's able to restructure and they cut that number in half or they cut it down even more. But you can't go forward carrying a $10, $12 million cap hit with your backup quarterback every single year, especially when Lance hopefully reaches a point where he's playing so well that he's going to get that second contract at a very high number and he's going to get paid, a large amount of money. And I just think that it's unrealistic business. I'm going to say it's bad business because I think any insurance policy is always smart no matter what you're talking about, football, life, whatever. But it's unrealistic, I think, to carry a tremendously talented backup quarterback year after year after year. My personal thinking of it is draft a guy that you like in the middle rounds and then have them on a cost-controlled deal for 4 years. Get somebody maybe has a little bit of mobility that maybe isn't the most polished coming out, but it has that like rushing floor. Because we've seen with guys like even like New Orleans, like everybody makes fun of Taysom Hill and they have all these jokes about Taysom Hill. But he was able to at least come in and give them some level of competence when he was in and he was their quarterback. Is he the guy you want starting long term? I don't think so at all, especially that they have Jameis Winston there now. But just having the ability to utilize his legs gave that Saints offense enough where they were able to stay afloat with a strong roster around him. And I think if you're able to find a guy like that maybe isn't valued as high, in the early rounds that you can get in the third, fourth round, you get them for 4 years on a rookie deal. And hey, if they're the reports coming out of your organization that they're so good in practice and that they deserve a starting job somewhere else and teams are desperate enough to pay him, 4 years go by, you get another one, and you just kind of rinse and repeat that process. It's cost efficient, and I think you minimize the risk by doing that as well.
Yep. Well, let's jump right into the next topic. Shanahan versus McVay. Who do you think is the better coach, and who do you think is the better play caller?
I think that Shanahan's the better play caller. I think that right now, like McVay has the ring and he has the more consistent success. So it's really hard to make an argument that he's not the better overall coach. My whole thing with it is that I think he took over a more ready-made product when he originally came to the Rams. I think that his season in 2018 was very similar to Kyle Shanahan's in 2019. They had a strong defense, a good roster, and they overachieved with quarterbacks that probably just are average at best and really were maximized by the scheme. I do think it's really unfair to compare this past season because Matthew Stafford is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. And no disrespect to Jimmy Garoppolo, I just don't think he falls into that tier. And I think that when you look at their head-to-head matchups, what Kyle Shanahan was able to do with guys like Jimmy and Nick Mullins, and just that's what really sold me on Kyle being the better coach. Like, I thought that he took McVay to the woodshed a few times. I thought there was a few times where he just really, I think that he's somebody that you just have to really look at each individual, nuanced discussion with this because of, again, like it's easy to be like, well, McVay has a Super Bowl ring. Kyle Shanahan has, 2 fourth quarter, meltdowns that are attached to his name. McVay's a better coach. I think McVay is a little bit more personable. I think that he's somebody that has a little bit of, like, you see him on the sideline, sprinting towards his guys after a touchdown, getting in guys' faces. Like, I think he's a little bit better of a, with his interpersonal skills, it feels like. Not that Shanahan's bad, but I do think that's one of McVay's greatest strength is that I do think these guys really do rally around him. Even some of the like mic'd up stuff from the Super Bowl, he really, got those guys in a mindset where they believe they could win that game. And he's there in their ear on the sideline where it feels like Shanahan's really just dialed in. It's business all the time. And you don't really see that same like fire from him. But if I'm starting a franchise today, I'm taking Kyle Shanahan over Sean McVay, and I'm not thinking twice about it. And I feel very strongly about that. But I also think Sean McVay is a very good coach in his own right. I just think that Kyle Shanahan has been criminally underrated, again, because people always tie it into the fourth quarters of these Super Bowls. Nobody ever blames Dan Quinn's defense for giving up a 25-point lead. We don't talk enough about some of the way the offense collapsed in that Super Bowl in 2019 against the Chiefs. I just think from a coaching standpoint, Kyle Shanahan gives you so much from a play design, play calling standpoint, and so much just from a situational awareness and understanding the game of football on a level that very few do, that gives him the edge for me. Like, to be honest with you, the only other coaches in the NFL I probably would take over Kyle Shanahan is Andy Reid, Bill Belichick, probably Mike Tomlin, and that's probably the end of the list, if we're being honest. And I think McVay is in the discussion. He absolutely deserves it. He won a Super Bowl a couple months ago. I just think Shanahan has proven that he is invaluable. And if I'm the 49ers, I'm giving him as many years as he wants to stay in San Francisco. I'm going to keep writing checks. I'm going to keep extending him as long as he wants to be here. I'm making that happen because I think he's that special as a head coach.
Now, this might upset a few fans or a few people in the chat. Now, I think McVay's the better coach. Now, you made a lot of strong points, and obviously McVay inherited a team. He inherited a Todd Gurley. He inherited a Jared Goff. He inherited players, and Kyle Shanahan didn't. Kyle Shanahan came in his first year as starting quarterback was Brian Hoyer, and the team was a mess, right? So I can't blame Kyle Shanahan for that. I can't blame Kyle Shanahan for having injuries and things like that. But at the end of the day, let's say we go down the line 15, 20 years, and McVay's retired and Shanahan's retired, right? And unless Shanahan obviously wins the Super Bowl with Trey Lance, but at the end of the day, what people look at is wins and losses. What people look at is how many Super Bowls you have. That's what people look at, and that's what ultimately, and if you are a coach or a player, gets you into the Hall of Fame, is that you win football games or you have a good record, or if you have great stats, if you are like a Dan Marino and you don't win a chip. But I think Sean McVay obviously has that Super Bowl, right? And then Sean McVay consistently has shown that he wins, right? Now he doesn't have injuries, and Kyle Shanahan does, so I can't blame Kyle Shanahan for that. But at the same time, McVay hasn't had a losing season in his 4 years or 5 years as the Rams coach. So I think McVay is the better coach than Kyle Shanahan. And until Kyle Shanahan does it, I think until Kyle Shanahan not necessarily wins the Super Bowl, but until Kyle Shanahan can at least win successfully back to back, if he doesn't have injuries, that's what determines to me if maybe Shanahan is better than McVay. And I mean, the Falcons Super Bowl, I think part of that does go to Dan Quinn. And I also agree with the Niners and the 49ers and Chiefs Super Bowl. I think that goes also to the defense because the defense kind of choked. But at the same time, looking at this last past NFC Championship game, that's on Shanahan. That's not on the team. That's on Shanahan because Shanahan only gave the ball to the best player on the offense one time in the fourth quarter. One time. Now, if you look at other situations, right, in Green Bay the week before, on a 3rd and 7 to get that into field goal range, he relied on Debo Samuel. But in the biggest moments, I feel like a lot of people say, "Oh, Kyle Shanahan chokes in the biggest moments," but I feel like he does kind of because not to necessarily say the Falcons Super Bowl because the Falcons Super Bowl and even the Niners and Chiefs, you could blame other parts to it, and even in this Super Bowl, even in the NFC Championship game, you could blame the defense, but not giving the ball to your best player in the fourth quarter, that doesn't make any sense. That's kind of like, okay, are you trying to lose the game? And I'm not saying Kyle Shanahan's purposely trying to lose the game, but that's not necessarily a smart decision because that's basically relying on Jimmy Garoppolo, relying on Elijah Mitchell, relying on Jeff Wilson. Like that's not gonna work in your favor, right? And when the Rams were coming back, but not giving the ball to Debo, that just doesn't make sense. Just think about that for a second. It doesn't make sense not to give the ball to your best player in the fourth quarter. Not to at least try to give it to him numerous times and not try to feed him the ball numerous times in that fourth quarter. Because and everybody says that game was Tart because Tart dropped that interception. But even if you look at the Super Bowl with the Niners and the Niners and the Chiefs Super Bowl, the Niners got the interception. Tarvarius Moore got the interceptions with 9 minutes left on the clock, and they only used 1 minute on the clock. Gave the Chiefs ball back with like 8 minutes and 25 seconds left on the clock. The Niners gave the Chiefs the ball back. The Chiefs went down and scored, and we obviously know what happened in that Super Bowl. Now, when you look at play caller, I gotta say it's McVay also. Now, I think Shanahan's a better play designer, and I think Kyle Shanahan can scheme better. But if I terminally when I look at the word play caller, and you decide what play to call in that certain situation, Kyle Shanahan, just no offense, but he just chokes it too much. And I said it right. I don't think it's all on Kyle, but that Rams game just did it for me because he just didn't give Debo Samuel the football.
The thing is with football is it's much more like if we're talking about like basketball or something, right? Like it's much easier. There's 5 guys on the floor. You can get a guy into an isolated matchup. It's very easy. Like if you don't get the ball to your best player in a playoff game in the NBA, like I understand it. In football, it's so much more complicated than that. And I do think that one thing that doesn't get talked about enough was that Trent Williams was playing at probably 50% at best of what he was capable of because of the injury he had. The fact that he played in that NFC Championship game is incredible in its own right based on the injury he had. And that 49ers offensive line didn't really it wouldn't instill confidence in me as a play caller. And I thought that the Rams defense did a really good job shutting down the run. So if we're talking about like these design runs or getting deep with the ball out of the backfield, like at a certain point, I think they were averaging like 2-point-something yards a carry, like maybe even less than that at a certain point in that game. I apologize for not remembering off the top of my head. So I don't fault Shanahan for saying or for not calling plays just to get Debo the ball like that. And it comes back to, if you go back and you break down these plays, and I spend a ton of time doing this. Like this is what I do in my free time. Like I'm kind of a nerd when it comes to I love watching game film and I love studying and learning from these people who know much more than myself. And if you go back and you watch that Super Bowl, like against the Chiefs, for example, like the play calling was fine. There were a couple plays where he got there's a play where he had Kittle wide open. If Jimmy G is able to hit Kittle over the middle, if the offensive line is able to hold up on the interior for just a split second longer, Kittle probably takes that ball well into the Chiefs' territory. They're probably burning a couple more minutes off the clock, and they probably end up winning that game. There's a handful of plays from that. There's a handful of plays from the game against the Rams this past year where I thought the play call was good in that spot, and I thought that the design was good. The execution just wasn't there. And sure, you can say the head coach is responsible for team not executing. Ultimately, the blame's going to fall on them. That's what comes with the territory of being an NFL head coach. But I think a lot of this really does come down to really taking the time to look. And I understand that not everybody wants to do this. But if you go back and you look at each of these plays and you look at each of these situations, yes, Kyle Shanahan's not perfect. And he would tell you, he'll probably be the first to tell you, yeah, I don't make the correct play call every single time. But a lot of the times he is making a very strong play call. He does have a defense in a blender. He has these guys just all over the place, and it just doesn't work out. And that's just part of what makes the sport of football so great, in my opinion, is that there are so many moving parts to every successful play. Even a 5-yard run to the, by a running back that may not look that, intricate to somebody just kind of observing. There's so much that has to go into a successful play call in the NFL. And I just think that at times the 49ers have faltered in those moments. And while I think Shanahan deserves some of the blame, I'm not ready to say that he deserves all of the blame. And what I come back to always when it comes to draft decisions, play call decisions, fourth down decisions, if I can see your reasoning in that moment, it makes sense to me. Like if there's a plan that gets laid out where, okay, well, I can see why you called this play in this situation. I can see why you made this draft pick. That's fine. If in that moment it doesn't make sense and then it still doesn't work out, that's where I think it's fair to criticize, because you're like, all right, well, this already seemed like a bad idea and it didn't work out. I think with Shanahan, if that makes sense, like there's a lot of situations where it looks good in the moment, it just doesn't pan out. And I think that ultimately, again, what makes the sport of football so appealing to me and to probably so many others is that there is so little room for error, and it is so, I don't want to say up to chance, but it is so dependent on all of these moving parts moving in cohesion. And I think that it's easy to look at the last few minutes of the fourth quarter of the NFC Championship game, but what I like to look at is all of the things that led up to that and all of the adversity they overcame, and so much of that was because of Shanahan's play calling. And no disrespect to Sean McVay, but I watched a lot of Rams this past season, and a lot of what they did was simply just put 4 or 5, split them out wide, and go empty and have Matt Stafford throwing the ball all over the place. And it felt like they got bailed out a ton by some spectacular throws, some spectacular plays. Like if Matt Stafford doesn't make a couple of these spectacular throws in the Super Bowl, McVay's 0-2 in Super Bowls, and it would have been one of the worst called Super Bowls I've personally ever seen. So again, I don't want to go on this like long-winded rant, but I just think that so much of it is really dependent on breaking down each situation and trying to understand why this call was played. What look was the defensive front showing? And I personally just think that Shanahan has done so much more with less, and because of that, he gets the edge for me.
Now, obviously, Shanahan has done more with less. I definitely can't disagree with you there. But like I said, I mean, not giving Debo Samuel the ball doesn't make sense. It's like Steve Kerr in the finals, Game 6 of the finals, taking out Steph Curry and not using Steph Curry and putting him on the bench and putting in Damian Lee. Like, it just doesn't – it's not putting you in a situation – it's not putting you in the best situation to win the game. But Bryant Culp says, I could be wrong, but at the end of the Super Bowl, didn't we stop running because Casey started stacking the box?
Yeah, they were loading the box with 8-9 players, and they were basically daring the 49ers to throw because they couldn't stop the run. And they probably, I'm not speaking for Steve Spagnuolo or the Chiefs defense. I don't know what their thinking was, but I imagine it was something along the lines of, we're having a really hard time stopping this rushing attack with too high. We need to throw a single safety, add another player in the box, and take our chances. And they did, and they got some. I honestly thought that Chris Jones should have been the MVP of that Super Bowl. The pressure that he generated in the fourth quarter on the interior against that 49ers offensive line was the difference in that football game. But again, if you go back and you look at the play calls, like there were guys open, like Kyle got guys open, like that play, even that ball that Jimmy threw over Emmanuel Sanders' head that didn't, that everybody, always comes back to. Like that was a great play design for that situation. If you go back to the previous drives, like they were some great looks that were opened up. They just didn't have the time to get it there. And some of it was I think maybe on the quarterback, some of it was on the offensive line, and a lot of it was simply just the Chiefs defense stepped up in a heroic way in a big spot in the biggest game of the season. So, that's one thing too that I think gets lost in things. And I struggle having these discussions at times with 49ers fans who don't want to take a step back and look at the full picture, because a lot of times really football can just boil down to, hey, we made a good play call, the defense made a better one, or vice versa. Hey, we called a good coverage, they just beat us with an incredible throw. And I think at times it's much harder to look at things that way, because it's much easier to just get upset and be like, oh, Kyle Shanahan sucks, he made a bad play call, or oh, the quarterback sucks, or our secondary stinks. Like it's so easy to just throw a scapegoat under the bus, rather than just acknowledge that, hey, we just got outplayed on this play, man. Like we could be really good and still not get the result we want. And that's, again, what makes sports in general so, appealing to me, is that it really is this constant back and forth. And sometimes even giving your best, that's not enough because of how good the opposing side was. And I think that a lot of this really does boil down to that. And I think that it was the same thing with the Rams. Like we saw the Rams in the NFC Championship game and the Super Bowl. There were a couple of plays where they really had to, like that no-look pass that Stafford threw, and that last drive, I think it was the last drive of the game against Cincinnati. If he doesn't make that throw, the Bengals probably win the Super Bowl. So it's like there's just little moments like that where if you're the Bengals defensive staff, like you have to feel really good about the game plan you threw out against that electric, explosive offense, and yet it still wasn't enough. And I think that at the end of the day, there's just a lot of situations where it's just as simple as being, real and being like, hey, I just think the other team had a better play call. They had better execution on this play. And it probably isn't as enjoyable for a fan to say that as somebody who's maybe trying to cover things from an unemotional standpoint, but it really does boil down to that a lot of the time.
Well, this was the first time we actually disagreed on a topic today. But next topic we have is, who is the better leader, Trey Lance or Jimmy Garoppolo?
I personally am not going to really have a strong opinion about that right now. I think that Trey Lance has taken tremendous steps as a leader based on what we've seen and based on his interaction with teammates, based on the way guys are rallying around him. But I also think Jimmy Garoppolo, again, has the equity of being that guy for years and being somebody that people believe in. And I don't think it's fair when Trey Lance hasn't had a single regular season game as the, incumbent starter, as the guy that's the guy going into the year. So I don't think it's really fair to say one way or the other. I think that you could also argue that Trey Lance might have picked up a thing or two from watching the way that Jimmy Garoppolo commanded respect in that locker room. I think it's natural that anybody in any profession learning under somebody who's had more experience than them is going to pick up things from them. And I'm not saying that Trey Lance is a great leader because of Jimmy Garoppolo. I thought that one of the first things I noticed watching him speak after he was drafted last year was that he tends to give off this very natural charisma, this very natural likability, and somebody that I like. I thought that a lot of his intangible qualities like that were as impressive as the physical abilities he has, just based on that's what you want your franchise to be built around. You want somebody that guys are going to want to rally around. So I definitely think Trey Lance is going to be that guy. I just also don't think it's fair to say that he's a better leader than Jimmy because he hasn't really faced the adversity and done the things that Jimmy's done during a regular season, during a playoff run as the starter. And I also don't think it's fair to say that Jimmy's a better quarterback or better leader, because we haven't seen Trey Lance get the opportunity to do it yet. So that might be a really good, topic to come back to, a couple years down the line. I just personally am not in a position where I can really have a strong conviction either way about it.
Yep. I mean, Jimmy Garoppolo's obviously been with the team longer, right? And obviously a lot of the team, pretty much the whole team likes Jimmy Garoppolo. A lot of the players say Jimmy Garoppolo is a great leader. The team says Jimmy Garoppolo is a great leader. The coaches say Jimmy Garoppolo is a great leader. And obviously Trey Lance hasn't been the starter last season. So obviously I can't necessarily say Trey Lance is definitely the better leader than Jimmy Garoppolo. But here's what I will say. There are signs about Trey Lance, and there are things that Trey Lance does that shows me that he can become a great leader and that he can become a better leader than Jimmy Garoppolo. Now, if you look at press conferences, right, where Jimmy Garoppolo might say, oh, we got to do better or we messed this up, Trey Lance, when he messed up in that Arizona game, he said it, right? I personally didn't play the best and I got to do better and I let my team down this week, right? So those are just little things that show me, and even in the offseason, right? Where obviously Jimmy Garoppolo, I can't, trash him too much because Jimmy Garoppolo's coming off a shoulder surgery. He's rehabbing. But Trey Lance is, reaching out to teammates, working out with Ayuk, we're working out with Ray McLeod. He's interacting with his teammates, trying to get to know them better in the offseason also. So there are certain things that show me that Trey Lance can become a great leader. Now, I'm not going to say right away that, Trey Lance is a better leader than Jimmy Garoppolo because we haven't seen Trey Lance be the starter yet. So I can't necessarily make that, claim right away. But at the same time, there are signs that point to Trey Lance being the better leader if or when he becomes the 49ers permanent starter.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Well, moving on to the last or second to last topic. This is not necessarily a topic, but Trent Williams was a 99 overall in Madden. He's the first offensive lineman in history to be a 99 overall. So any thoughts on this, Jordan?
Yeah, it's well deserved. Trent Williams is one of the best players in football, and you can make an argument that, I mean, I still think it's hard to not argue Aaron Donald, but if we're talking just best overall football players, because everybody always jumps to the quarterback position because of how important it is, but if we're talking strictly just best in the league, best football player, I think that Trent Williams and Aaron Donald are at the forefront of that discussion, and I think that you could make an argument for Trent Williams, even though, again, I think it's really Aaron Donald's he's a once in a lifetime kind of player. He's just so good. But Trent Williams played at a level last year where he's elevated into that conversation. He's doing things as an offensive lineman that I've never seen before. And he is, in my opinion, the best athlete on the entire 49ers roster and one of the best in the league. When you consider what he can do at that size, it's just unheard of. So I'm glad that Madden finally started giving the big guys some love and started to, recognize how important O-line play is. Because I think there's a couple guys that, at least in my lifetime, that were deserving. Guys like Jonathan Ogden, Larry Allen, Joe Thomas. Like, there were some guys who definitely deserved that 99 overall ranking, but Trent Williams absolutely deserves it as well. And I don't think that it should be taken away from him because other players might have been really good before him. I'm just glad that moving forward, hopefully this is something where Madden is really giving the love that these guys deserve, because you'd be shocked at how much it means to these guys. A lot of these guys grew up playing Madden to not only see themselves in this game, but to get the respect and recognition. And I think that offensive linemen deserve that just as much as receivers and running backs and quarterbacks, skill position guys on both sides of the ball. It's much more glamorous, but those guys deserve some love too. Without them, you're going to have a hard time winning football games. And Trent Williams is simply just, again, one of the best players in the entire NFL.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely well-deserved because Trent Williams is, in my opinion, the best offensive lineman in football, right? And Trey Lance is, I mean, not Trey Lance, I keep saying Trey Lance for whatever reason, but Trent Williams is dominant and he's just one of the best. And that left tackle position is probably the only position on that offensive line that I'm not worried about coming into the season, unless obviously Trent Williams gets hurt. But I mean, Trent Williams deserves this. And like you said, there are a lot of players growing up, a lot of current players where they play Madden when they were younger, right? And they still play Madden even to this day, right? So seeing, obviously getting themselves in the game, which is huge, but getting a 99 overall or getting a 90 overall or getting, near that 99 overall range, it's a huge accomplishment for them and they're obviously proud of it. So, and they obviously love the recognition because they grew up playing that game, right? So obviously it's huge for Trent Williams, definitely well deserved. And really, that's pretty much all I got to say about this topic. It's definitely well deserved for Trent Williams. And the last topic of the day, CBS ranks Debo the 8th best wide receiver in the NFL. Now, I don't know who they have above him. I got to look that up real quick. But do you think Debo is the 8th best receiver in the NFL?
No, I think he's no lower than like 4, maybe 5. I think that he's somebody that just has such a unique skill set that it's very hard not to focus on the production. Like, I think a lot of times what people get caught up in is they look at like route running ability and hands and stuff. So like, I'll say it right off the bat. Like, I think Devontae Adams is the best receiver in football. I don't think that that's something that really can be debated. I think he deserves that right. It'll be interesting to see how he looks in Vegas with Derek Carr and that Raiders offense. but he's been the best receiver in football for a few years. I think it's really tough because you have guys like I think Justin Jefferson's up there as well. He's a tremendously talented wide receiver in his own right. I still really like guys like DK Metcalf. I think AJ Brown, when he's healthy, is one of the best receivers in football. But what Debo is able to do and the pace he was on before he started getting into that like hybrid role where he was running the ball a ton too, he was on pace for near 2,000 yard season before that. Like he just was on this unreal clip to start the year when he was used primarily as a receiver. And I think some of his ability gets understated because of what he was able to do as a running back. He still has a great release package. He still is a guy that can win vertically. He has good hands. Last year, he did a really, really good job winning contested balls. So I don't see how you could ever rank him outside of the top 5, especially coming off the season he had last year, which was a historic season, doing things that no other player at the position has ever done. So, yeah, I disagree with that ranking. But again, like everybody's entitled to their own opinions. And I would have to imagine that, again, it comes back to a lot of times people get enamored with, maybe a more flashy release package, or, they'll say that some player has a better route running ability or this or that. To me, at the end of the day, results are what matter. And Debo Samuel provided results, amongst the best. Hey, look at a guy like Cooper Kupp. Like Cooper Kupp had a great year last year. He's been that guy for years. And it took the production for people to really kind of vault him into that conversation as one of the best. He's been that guy for a long time. So I think that at the end of the day, a lot of it really is just kind of like recency bias. But yeah, Debo's no lower than 5. There's no way I could have him lower than that.
Now, I don't have the list in front of me, but I don't really need to have the list in front of me. I think Debo is a top 5 wide receiver in the NFL, right? And I think, like you said, I think Cooper Kupp, obviously, with the production that he had this year, I don't think you could put him, I don't think you could put him lower than Debo. I think that's still a conversation. And then if you look at Devontae Adams, I think Devontae Adams, obviously, elite route runner, great player. So I don't think you can make that debate. But, I mean, what Debo Samuel does for the 49ers, I don't think any receiver has that sort of impact on their team. Because there was a lot of times this season where the Niners offense couldn't get anything going. And Debo Samuel would be that spark in the offense. And Debo Samuel would get us in field goal range. Or Debo Samuel would catch a screen pass and take it 80 yards and score a touchdown. There's a lot of things that Debo Samuel did for this offense in a lot of big ways. And no other receivers really being used in the backfield, right? And that's what a lot of people say. Kyle Shanahan's ahead of the league in that way, where in 2019 we would use Debo in jet sweeps. And now we're using him in the backfield, and we have mismatches and using Debo Samuel in the backfield, and we create mismatches where he's going up against a linebacker and he's beating his linebacker. So what Debo Samuel does and the impact that he has on the 49ers and what he was able to do, not only receiving, but also rushing and using his legs and being used as a running back. I think Debo's probably the best gadget player in football. And I think you can't put Debo any lower than 5 because of what Debo was able to do. He wasn't only able to put up the numbers receiving, right? And a lot of people say, and this is a debate that I had a long time ago with Ben Meyerson on my show, was Justin Jefferson and Debo Samuel, right? And Justin Jefferson, obviously, a lot of people might say Justin Jefferson is the better receiver, but Debo Samuel was able to put up similar numbers, and he was only maybe like 100 or 200 yards off less. He only had 200 or 200 yards less than Justin Jefferson did have receiving. But Debo Samuel was also putting up way more rushing yards. He had like 700, 800 rushing yards also on the ground. So what Debo Samuel was able to accomplish this year, I don't think you can put him any lower than 5 because there's no receiver in the history of the NFL that was able to do what Debo Samuel was able to do this season.
Yeah, very true.
Yep. Well, that basically wraps up the show. I appreciate you for joining me, Jordan. It was a pleasure to have you on. If you haven't already subscribed to Jordan's channel, Elliott Sports, the link is in the description. If you're not following Jordan on Twitter, go follow him on Twitter. He posts great stuff there. He's one of the smartest fans on Niners Twitter. And go check out his articles on Niners Nation. The link is also in the description. I think he just posted an article 2 days ago, if I am correct, but go check his stuff out. YouTube link is in the description at Elliott Sports. Twitter, Splash Cousins on Twitter. The link is also in the description. And go check him out on Niners Nation. Go check out some of his articles if you haven't already. And if you're not subscribed to my channel, please go do so. It would be greatly appreciated. I appreciate the chat today. We had almost like 20 something people in here at one point, and the chat was great today. So I really appreciate it. We had a lot of great people. Barry, a baller, Cinnamon, Bryant. We had a lot of great people. Sorry if I'm forgetting it. Mariah. We had a lot of great people in the chat. So I appreciate everybody for joining me. And if you haven't already subscribed to my channel, like I said, like the video. And hopefully I'll be back with more live streams. I appreciate you for joining me, Jordan, once again. And we'll see you guys next time. Peace.